Hello and welcome to ChamberTalk, a new podcast brought to you by Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce. I'm your host, Finlay Jack, and today I'm joined by the Policy Director at the Chamber, Ryan Crighton. And for our very first episode, we are thrilled to be welcoming Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf. Thank you for joining me, Ryan and First Minister. Humza, we'll just get straight into it, really. You've been in your role as First Minister for nearly a year now, I think about 10 months or so. Have you been surprised by the challenges presented to you by that role? There's been plenty. We'll get more in depth in some of them later, but has it been much of a shock to the system?
I think it's fair to say it has been an eventful 10 months. I think nobody could suggest otherwise. Yes and no, and I'm sorry, that is the typical politician's answer. But when you go for First Minister, and I thought about, do I go for it, not go for it after Nicola's resignation, the one thing that's a dead certainty is there will be stress, if not every day of the week, then certainly multiple times throughout the week, and you've just got to take that and bank that as being part of the job. But I could not have envisaged what would have happened, particularly in the first few months of my role as First Minister. I could not have imagined what we would have seen in relation to the police investigation and other such things. So that was really challenging and continues to be difficult. So yes, definitely a challenging 10 months, but a massively and hugely enjoyable 10 months. You don't get to be the First Minister of the country you love, the country you call home. Often I think you get one chance at it, and you've got to really, I think, enjoy the job as much as, of course, deal with what are the challenging aspects of it too.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we'll talk about these more in depth later on in the episode, but let's just turn the clock back a few decades briefly. At what age, at what moment did you realise that politics was going to be the career for you?
That's a really good question. And I suppose it is somewhat relevant, actually, to what's happening in the world today. So for me, I was really always, I think in my head, I was going to go into law when I was younger because, being from the background in terms of being a Scottish, Pakistani, South Asian, my parents were always wanting me to either be a doctor, dentist, lawyer, pharmacist, or accountant. And my dad's an accountant. Those are the 5 careers. You've got to choose one of those 5. And I thought to myself, I'm decent at English and some of the other subjects. Science didn't really appeal to me when I was younger. So I thought, okay, I think law is the one for me. And I remember filling out the UCAS form, and I think you got 5 options at a time, and most of them were law. And then the last one I snuck in politics because I began to get interested in politics. And I got into politics. I got into law as well, and I had to make that choice. It probably was, to this day, the most frightening conversation that I had to have with my parents. I told them I wanted to do politics over law, but they were great about it, especially my dad. He was like, look, we need more people like us, people of colour, we need more Muslims, we need people that are different in politics. My dad was hugely political. My mum, she was really encouraging, but a bit more of the kind of law, maybe, son, as well as considering politics. But for me, the moment, the really pivotal moment in my life came in 9/11, the days after 9/11. I was 16 years old when 9/11 took place, and I had never thought about politics, but I remember the day after 9/11, like 9/11 was a Tuesday, the day after that, the Wednesday morning, going into school and getting bombarded with questions about, do you know who did this? Do you know who was behind it? Why do Muslims hate America? And I'm sitting there like a 16-year-old boy going, we were just talking about the football the day before and all the other things that teenagers talk about, and suddenly get bombarded. And I thought to myself, I've got to get a bit clued up in the world. I remember that night, then watching the news, 10 o'clock news with my dad. And usually my dad watched 10 o'clock news and I'd go up to my room or into the kitchen or on the computer. But this time I watched the news with him, and I thought, I've got to get educated, and really opened up a whole world of politics to me. And then got involved in the various different kind of anti-war movements, particularly in relation to the Iraq War thereafter, and really sparked my political interest from there.
And was your political journey straight to the Scottish National Party, or did you?
No, it was. But interestingly, so in my household, not untypical actually, I'm sure of many households, my mother was diehard Labour, and my dad was diehard SNP. And so, you'd have the SNP post on the upstairs window, election time, and the Labour post on the downstairs window. And the turning point for my mum came post-Iraq war. She just completely switched to the SNP. And Dad never pushed it down her throat, but my dad, actually, in some sense, was a real pioneer. He was the first, certainly he claims anyway, he was the first Asian member of the SNP in Glasgow. And at that point, it was really quite a move. You were really out there if you supported the SNP as somebody who was South Asian, because the natural party for immigrants, like my father, my grandfather, the natural party was the Labour Party for Party of Immigrants. And actually the SNP, they were told all sorts of rumours and innuendos about the SNP, that the SNP was effectively the National Front. They were a racist party, a far-right party. Couldn't be further from the truth. So my dad joined, so he was very political. And for me, the journey to the SNP, it was just natural. It came from my belief, having been involved in particular the anti-war movements around the Iraq war in particular, also being interested in foreign policy as I was, and continue to be, of course, but as I was back then, when I heard, it was a speech by Alex Salmond actually in the House of Commons about the Iraq war, and I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. If this country, Scotland, is opposed to the war, I had been on many demonstrations where I'd seen that very visible opposition, then why are our sons and daughters being sent to that war? And it was a very powerful speech, not just by Alex Salmond, but by one of the demonstrations, a woman called Rose Gentle, whose son, Gordon Gentle, sadly died in Iraq. And she became a real figurehead as part of the anti-war movement. I thought to myself, yeah, well, I believe Scotland should be making these decisions for itself and for herself. And yeah, it was a natural evolution to the SNP.
Your first job in politics, certainly after university, would have came when you were working for the late MSP Bashir Ahmad. I've heard you speak about him a number of times quite candidly. He was a bit of a role model to you, I guess. You worked with him for him really for 2 years or so before he sadly passed. That must have been a difficult time to lose such a huge figure and I guess a role model in your life, perhaps somebody that really helped you get into politics too.
Yeah, and look, I've known Bashir since I was born, the day I was born. He was a friend of my father's. We used to call him Chacham, which translates into Uncle Mango, because he used to bring these boxes of mangoes, Pakistani mangoes, all the time. When it was mango season in Pakistan, he'd come with these big giant boxes of mangoes, and we'd love it when he'd come round. And he was a great friend of the family's, and he helped me to get an internship in the Northeast, actually, when I was interested in politics. He guided me towards the SNP, and then, just as a kind of matter of fact, when it was polling day 2007, it was actually my last exam in university. So I just came straight out of the US politics exam, straight onto a polling station. And the next day, if you remember 2007, there was an issue around the electronic counting. And we got the vote the next day. And it being evident that Bashir had been elected as well. And it's just a matter of fact, he said to me, just remember, we start work on the Monday. And I said to him, actually, I've got another job. And he said to me, you don't? And I said, look, that's that done. And actually, my predecessor, Nicola, came to speak to me about it as well. And, I didn't need much convincing, to be honest, to let the other opportunity go. And it was huge when he passed away. And I think it's one of those ones where I think in our lives, we can often have role models that we don't actually know are role models. So they're teaching us day by day, and we don't even know we're being taught. But he was just such a nice... it's hard. I've got so many stories of how nice a man he was. And one of the things I'll never forget is that, there we were, he and I, we both entered the Parliament at the same time, me as researcher, him as a member of Scottish Parliament. We were finding our feet, and trying to work our way around the place. And I remember walking with him, and another colleague of ours who'd been in the Parliament for a number of terms before us stopped and said to Bashir, "Oh, Bashir, is that your boy?" He's just made an assumption. Is that your son? And I was about to come in and say, "No, I work for him." And he grabbed me by the hand and he said, "Yeah, that's my son." And I thought, oh, you know what? That is the mark of the man. He was just a nice, gentle soul. He was also very, very sharp politically, but, a lovely man. So it was really tough to lose him. But, at the same time, definitely a lot of lessons that I learned from him without him having to sit me down and say, let me teach you a thing or two, Sonny, about politics. Actually, he just taught me every day through his character and his being.
That internship in the Northeast, so You're not one of these ones that did the stint in the Peterhead
I
office.
did, exactly
you?
that, with Alex Salmond, yeah.
Yeah.
And Stuart Stevenson. They shared an office in Maiden Street in Peterhead.
I remember it well.
Yeah, and it was, I won't lie, it was a bit of the shock to the system. I'd kind of, in Scotland, not been that much outside of kind of the central belt, Glasgow and Edinburgh, really. And came to Peterhead and stayed above that flat in Maiden Street. I had hair down to my shoulders actually back then, so it was this guy in a sharp suit, young Scottish Asian boy from with a Glasgow accent, kind of plonked to the middle of Peterhead. I think folk looked at me like, what's he doing here?
I think there'll be books written about that Maiden Street office. I mean, it's a conveyor belt of ministers, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. But I learned a lot. I mean, from Alex too. And look, Alex and I have got our differences, but he gave me an opportunity then, and learned a lot from Alex about politics, and from Stuart Stevenson too. They shared an office together, and there was one dreadful worker he had at the time, a chap called Jeff Aberdeen. But we'll not say too much about him. No, Jeff was good, but Jeff and I worked together in that office as well, so got to know Jeff and people that I've had a friendship to this very day.
Yeah, and would you class Alex as a role model as well?
Look, Alex taught me a lot. I'm somewhat, I suppose, if I'm being really candid, it does upset me in terms of how that relationship, is not has gone the way it has gone, because I did learn a lot from Alex. I mean, I mentioned to you already in this podcast, I heard him speak about the Iraq War, and that's what made me think, the SNP is the party for me. So look, he appointed me in my first ever ministerial job in 2012. I was also his parliamentary liaison officer before then, so I learned a lot from Alex, and that's why I'm disappointed that we are where we are in terms of that relationship. And I always say this publicly: I don't have an issue that he's leading another party. Now that's his prerogative. But look, as somebody who I know believes passionately in independence as he does, the best thing we can do is to make sure that the Alba Party is not kicking lumps out of the SNP when we are the biggest vehicle that is driving forward independence. We are not the enemy. We are the body that will and the party that will regain Scotland her independence. So that is a bit of a sore point if I'm honest.
And is he kicking lumps out of the SNP?
Well, I think most of the press releases I see from Alba seem to be attacking the SNP, and I don't really understand that. As I say, we are the biggest vehicle for independence by quite some distance. I don't know Alba's kind of party membership numbers, but we are by far the biggest, as I say, by quite some distance. So a lot of press releases I see tend to be criticising the SNP, and that to me is misfiring.
Is there a world where these bridges with Alba can be built to go for that really, I guess, the greater good, what you would say, of independence?
For me, I suppose the way I look at it is when it comes to winning our independence, working and doing the work on the ground is going to be the most important. We've got to try to convince people. That's doorstep by doorstep. It's business by business. Those conversations that have to be had. I mean, I'll work virtually. There's some exceptions, obviously. people with very extreme views we wouldn't work with, but we'll work with those that are in the mainstream in terms of their political views. I'm not going to look at what their membership number is or what political membership card they carry. Campaign with just about anybody, but with Alex, I think for me, as I've said already, if Alba are absolutely serious about wanting to advance the cause of independence, well, stop fighting on the SNP constantly, and instead show that you're serious about advancing the cause by when it comes to criticising the Conservative government and criticising those who want to hold Scotland back.
You touched on it earlier. Alex obviously awarded you your first ministerial role in 2012. You were the first Muslim and the youngest MSP to join a Scottish government. That was in the 13th year of Holyrood's existence. Why did it take so long for a Muslim MSP?
You could look at it. You could look at it in two ways. You could look at other parliaments across the world and say they were nowhere near that position in 13 years. But the others, I actually happen to take the other view, which is we're a very modern parliament, and it probably shouldn't have taken as long as that. The truth is, in Scotland, like any other country, and the parliament, like any other institution, will of course have structural barriers in the way, and that's not just racial barriers. Of course, racial barriers too, barriers for women. Think about the amount of women we lost at the last election, 2021, because who cited childcare commitments and childcare, or the family issues, and it not being a family-friendly parliament. So I think there's a number of institutional barriers that continue to be in the way. And although we've made some advancements, we talk about Muslims. Actually, if you look at where we are now, we've also got a Sikh member of the Scottish Parliament. We've got, but most of, in fact, not all, of the people of colour that we've got come from a kind of Scottish South Asian background. We've never had, and I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever had a black Scot as a member of the Scottish Parliament. I don't think we've ever had a Jewish member of the Scottish Parliament. I don't think we've ever had somebody who would describe himself as a Chinese Scot or Japanese Scot. There's lots of barriers we still have to overcome racially in terms of our Parliament being a proper representation of our country, and the onus is absolutely on Parliament, but political parties as well, to stop kind of talking the talk about it. We want to welcome people, we want to be diverse. Actually, what are you actually doing? And that's a challenge for me as party leader in terms of the SNP. What are we actually doing in terms of taking forward positive action to make sure our Parliament is truly representative?
I want to move on slightly now and talk about the last year for you, because it has been huge. A lot's happened since really last January, let's say. But it was mid-February when Nicola Sturgeon announced that she would stand down as First Minister. We all found out through a press conference held at Bute House. How did you find out? And was it a surprise for her cabinet ministers?
It was a huge surprise. The timing of it was a surprise. I think most of us probably thought Nicola would stand down before 2026 and give a kind of new leader a couple of years maybe, or a year. I think a lot of us thought it would be after a general election. Again, it seemed like a kind of natural point by which to say, right, we fought that election campaign and move into 2026 with a new leader in place. And you're right, it was February the 15th that she actually announced her resignation. My wife and I were on the way back with the kids in the car. We were visiting Nadia's sister in Reading, and we were in the kind of long journey back up to Dundee where we live. And during that journey, because good 8-hour journey or something of that effect, kids were, I think, fast asleep, and Nadia and I were just chatting away. What's next? And do you think Nicola resign? If she did, would you go for it? I remember my wife asking me, going, I remember I was health secretary at the point. I remember saying, Nads, I've got enough stress in my life. I'm not sure we need to be even thinking about that. And then lo and behold, to get home, I think it was about 10:15 or 9:30 at night, and Nicola phones. And I thought, that's really unusual. She's phoning me, and it was Valentine's Day, of course. 10:15 on February the 14th. So I went to the next room, and I said, how are you? And I remember her saying, I'm fine, but you're not going to like what I've got to tell you. And I knew immediately what she was about to say. I said, don't say it then. And she said it, and I won't lie, there was a few profanities from my end, I think, mainly the shock of it. And that was that. And then I phoned John Swinney straight away. Said, John, she told me she told John, what is this? What is she doing that for? John said, look, she's made up her mind, and that's right. And when I really felt for Nicola was when she said to me, I just want a bit of normality back. She said, I can't see a friend or go for a coffee without my protection officers around me. Everything's got to be scripted, choreographed, the scrutiny on me. And I get it. I now understand that, being the position that I'm in, but she had 8 years of it. It was a total surprise, total shock.
So the last time we were sitting face to face was, I think it was maybe day 8 or day 9 of your tenure as First Minister. The day before the police arrived at Peter Morell's door. Do you ever reflect upon that and think how different the last 10 months might have been if you'd been able to use that early stage of your premiership to push forward your policy agenda? It was a big distraction, obviously.
Yeah, massive, and no point pretending otherwise. And actually, that week, you're right, because I think that was the first kind of couple of days of recess, of parliamentary recess in the Easter break. And we thought, this will be the point. You get to set your agenda. You've got a kind of almost a 2-week free run at it because Parliament's not sitting. You get to stamp your authority. Really good visit to the North East and really set out our priorities around the North East and Scotland's economic potential currently and future potential. Then you're right. The next day, I get a call from the Permanent Secretary saying, I've been authorised by Police Scotland to let you know that police investigation, the arrest has been made actually at that point, and it was after the fact. I was told about it, and I was shocked, absolute state of shock. And you're absolutely right, a complete distraction, and it's had a significant impact on the party, both in terms of morale, but also I think how we're viewed by the public. And again, I'd be fooling your kind of listeners if I pretended otherwise. I don't really go back over and think, well, if that didn't happen, what would it have meant? Because what is the point and the purpose of that? I've really just got a job to make sure I set out an agenda, and that's why I have the prospectus. It's why I've got had the programme for government. It's what our budget. I'm sure we'll talk plenty about that. It allows us to be able to talk through what our priorities are. And I do think the message is getting out there around, well, this is what the government, the SNP-led Scottish Government stands for. This is what Humza stands for as the First Minister. And I'm able to really, and I look forward, particularly in a general election year, to driving that message home about what's important in terms of my priorities and the government I lead's priorities.
How much of a setback was that at the start? Because Peter Morrell was arrested in the start of April, Colin Beattie I think a week or two later, and then just as we're kind of getting over that saga at the start of June, Nicola Sturgeon gets arrested. That's 2-3 months now into your tenure, and it must have been all you felt like you were talking about for 2 or 3 months.
It did actually, it absolutely did feel like that. You kind of hit the nail on the head, and that was what was frustrating. I think every time we almost wanted one of these reset moments. I think the news of Colin's arrest came out on the day I was doing our prospectus, if I remember correctly. So we've taken a fair bit of time to work through the various aspects of that. And so look, there's no getting away from it. It was a distraction. It was difficult, remains difficult to deal with. But also, you use those moments to also show leadership, I think. And for me, I was never going to shy away from it. There were some people actually who, members of the opposition that would say, "Oh, God, he's doing media every day about this stuff. You think his advisor would tell him to stop?" Well, I thought first of all, if the opposition are saying that to me, that I should stop talking, then I should probably keep talking. But secondly, the point is that you either have two choices in these situations. You either kind of just shy away, hide away, don't confront the obvious challenge, or you show and demonstrate leadership and take it front on and head on, and that's what I've always intended to do.
Do you ever go to Nicola Sturgeon for a source of advice or for support? Is she somebody that you rely on often?
Yeah, look, I've got so much time for Nicola and a lot of affection for Nicola because she supported me throughout the years. I mentioned the story about Bashir, and it was Nicola that kind of sat me down and said, "Look, this is a great opportunity for you." She supported me. She's given me good advice. She also promoted me to cabinet, which I'm grateful for, and all the experience of that. And gave me a really tough job as health secretary, but one that I'm telling you was certainly a learning curve and built strength and resilience within me as an individual as well. So look, Nicola and I will speak. It's pretty infrequent because I'm busy doing what I'm doing in terms of running the matters of state as it was. But also I think Nicola's approach has been purposely trying not to kind of say, this is what I think you should be doing and this is what my advice. I think she's quite happy for myself as First Minister, but also my government colleagues to chart our own course and chart our own path. So I know she's always there. I know if I pick up the phone and send her a message, she'll always make herself available for a call or a chat. But I think also it's important that as First Minister I chart my own course.
Do you think the party has successfully reset now? You've got a new chief executive. You put much of the last 10 months behind you. Are you on a firmer footing now, or is there still some challenges ahead?
Look, there's still challenges ahead. I think absolutely we've been able to make sure that our voice is getting heard out with the challenges of the police investigation. And I think we've got a really good team to help us do that. I think Stephen Flynn, who's well known in these parts, of course. I think Stephen Flynn and Mary Black, plus the whole team down in Westminster, incredible job getting Scotland's voice heard. I think the team up here, the cabinet, I'm still saying to them, let's all make sure that every single cabinet minister is getting out there, is known to people, is not just a one-man show here. I don't intend Of course, I'll lead from the front. That's my job to do as First Minister. But I expect everybody in this team to make sure that they are visible and at the forefront, because I don't want it to be just a one-man show, a one-man band, the SNP. So I do think that, and I think the launch that we did on Friday in terms of the general election launch in Glasgow is a good demonstration. And that week, actually, on the Monday, a week ago, I was in Glasgow University doing an economy speech. I think, again, the more and more that we talk about policy and substance and our messaging, the more hopefully people, above and beyond these challenging issues, look at the SNP and say, you know what, actually their values are our values.
And just before we kind of talk about some of these more specific issues, let's talk about October, a difficult month on many accounts. You've been in the job for 6 months by this point. You'd already faced a myriad of challenges, really. And it was the 9th of October, actually, when you spoke to the media about your in-laws being trapped in Gaza. You know, how difficult was it for you to kind of balance the day job with also these really unfathomable personal issues, which, you know, must have been taking up so much, you know, of your emotions, of your mental capacity?
Yeah, I think like those kind of 4 weeks where my mother-in-law and father-in-law were in Gaza are probably amongst the lowest 4 weeks of my life, and certainly of Nadia's life. They were difficult, tough, because day by day we just didn't know whether they would survive, and that's the truth of the matter. But we had to try to give them some kind of hope. And, you know, we had so many difficult moments. You know, I was at party conference in Aberdeen, you know, and I got a call at 1 a.m. from mother-in-law saying that their neighbour had been told to evacuate because they were going to get hit. And so that meant that they were going to end up, their house would end up being impacted and affected, and they were just wandering the streets at 1 a.m. Now, it turned out that that wasn't the case, and again, these things in a war zone, you know, messages get lost. But and then, of course, I did my speech during conference, and an hour later, I got a call again from mother-in-law saying that she had been hit. Now, luckily, I say luckily for them, they hadn't been directly hit, but unfortunately, somebody in the neighbourhood had been hit, and the blast from that strike had knocked out their windows, their doors, and everything. And so day by day, we just didn't know. And truthfully, trying to support Nadia, as well as my in-laws, but trying to support Nadia to say, you know, your parents will be fine. In reality, not knowing if that was going to be the case or not. And there was times when I just didn't think we would probably see them again. And then, obviously, doing the job here, which is a job that's all-consuming, while at the same time trying to navigate the kind of geopolitics internationally, but domestically, because what I didn't want, I'm very conscious I'm, you know, the first Muslim First Minister. I'm, you know, the First Minister who's got family in Gaza. I didn't want other communities, such as, for example, our Jewish community, who'd also been terribly impacted by those atrocious attacks on October the 7th. I didn't want them to feel that there wasn't somebody there who stands alongside them through the hurt and the pain and the grief that they're feeling. So it was difficult for me personally, professionally, but I would say those 4 weeks were amongst the lowest that I've ever had.
How did you cope? I mean, putting on the brave face in front of camera during those 4 weeks. I think you had the conference in Aberdeen, as you mentioned. There's a lot going on around WhatsApp and code messages and so on. How were you able to, I guess, just deal with the cameras on a daily basis, knowing that, I mean, well, you didn't know what was happening?
I think it was just trying to be as upfront and honest, and it was a very emotional time. I mean, I think more interviews during that period that I was shedding tears than ever in my career. So I took the approach from day one that I'm just going to be really upfront and honest in my dealing of this situation, and try to just be empathetic, which, you know, I think for me comes very naturally. I mean, it's been the way I've done my politics and who I am, I hope, as an individual, let alone my politics, and try to just show that empathy and not see it as a vulnerability, excuse me, but see it as a strength. And also look at a wonderful team, you know, understanding what I was going through, Deputy First Minister, Cabinet, Ministers, party colleagues, all making sure they rallied right in behind me, picked up where they needed to pick up. But look, you just also got to just get on with it. Party conference is a great example of that. You've got to just do what you need to do, support your family as best you possibly can throughout it. And the team were excellent as well. You know, they understood if I needed, you know, there was often a time when I was in the middle of a meeting, but I saw my phone, I would have my phone out, and I'd say to the people in the meeting, look, I would normally not have my phone here, but there's one call, if it comes from my mother-in-law in Gaza, I'm going to take it no matter what. And actually it was a business engagement, at the party conference, and that call came, and they were absolutely understanding. So I think people understood as well, and the messages I got, and to this day still get from people wishing me and my family well, are really heartwarming indeed.
Yeah, I think you showed remarkable courage in that time, and I can imagine the personal stress. I mean, like, a set piece event like a conference speech would normally take up 100% of your attention. So it must have been really difficult to. I'm just trying to understand how do you have to compartmentalise it to a degree and go into kind of First Minister mode, if you pardon the expression? And
I never viewed it like that way. I always viewed that my response to that situation was all part of me, both as a human being but also as First Minister. I think people want their First Minister to be somebody who speaks out on global issues. I think they want their First Minister to be somebody who's empathetic. I think they want the First Minister to be somebody who understands their own personal grief. So for me, you'll notice obviously in my conference speech, the first section was all about Gaza and our response to Gaza. And ultimately, whatever I do in politics, I want it to be guided by those values of compassion, of justice, of fairness. And I just approached the Gaza situation and continued to approach it in that vein. And that's the same for domestic policy. So it wasn't really a case of compartmentalising it. I'm not sure that's as easy to do as people kind of suggest either. It was just a case of doing what's necessary and bringing those values to your politics as much as to your personal life.
It was the 5th of November when you were reunited with your in-laws. How did that feel?
It was an incredible feeling. And actually, I've got a video of the moment they walked in as well, which I've never shared. It's a very kind of personal moment for our family. And we just didn't believe it until we saw them come in the room. But you just hear, I mean, everybody in that video almost kind of collapses to the floor because the emotion of seeing them again. Because I mean, genuinely, I think a lot of people in our wider family just thought we would never see them again. So it was an incredibly powerful moment. But they are still traumatized. The mother-in-law especially. Mother-in-law really carries a lot of anger, frustration, upset. She can't understand why the world isn't really doing anything. So they are really traumatized. And of course, Nadia still has family there. Her brother is still there. Her gran, who's 93, who she's very close to, is still there. Her stepmom is still there, who she's close to. Her aunties and uncles are still there. Again, these are people she would visit every single year in Gaza. My wife used to go every single year to Gaza before the blockade. So these are people she all grew up with, knows well. So every day she's still watching the news and still carrying their heart and their pain. And that's why I continued to call. It's not the only reason, of course, but I continued to call for an immediate ceasefire because far too many children, far too many women, and far too many innocent men have lost their lives. And there is no solution in war. I have to say, there is no solution in war, and that's why we have to get that immediate ceasefire and deal with the root cause of the problem. That root cause of that problem actually over many decades has not changed. That root cause continues to be that we made promises to two communities here. We made a promise that there would be an Israeli state, and we promised that there should be a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. We only ever fulfilled one side of that equation without fulfilling the right of a Palestinian state. Until we do that, I'm afraid we'll continue to see these cycles of violence. So we need that immediate ceasefire now, I think, more than we've needed it ever before.
Has that been your biggest challenge of your tenure so far, do you think? Just that month of October and dealing with everything? I mean, there has been a lot.
No. I mean, for me, as I say, that was probably the lowest month of my life, politically, professionally, whichever way you wish to describe it. So I did find that 4 weeks incredibly difficult. So by quite some distance, yes. You've mentioned issues in police investigations, so on. They kind of pale into insignificance in comparison to whether or not your mother-in-law and father-in-law are going to live or not. The next day, whether they survive or whether they get killed in an airstrike. These are matters of life and death, and by far the most difficult period of my life.
You've dealt with a lot on a personal level, and things out with your control, such as the arrest, as we've said. There's also been a lot going on the political level, on the policy level too. One of your pledges at the start was to reset this relationship with business. Do you feel you're making any ground on that?
I definitely think we're making ground in it. By the way, it's a phase that it's not going to be a light switch that you turn off and say, by the way, the relationship is now reset. Well, you've got to work hard at the reset, and there's going to be bumps along the road, and I'm sure we'll certainly explore some of that. But just today, I was with Offshore Energies UK. I had some of the biggest oil and gas executives around the table. We had colleagues that are involved in renewables. And of course, many oil and gas companies are involved in renewables themselves in terms of joint ventures and investments that they're making. And it was a really open discussion, a great discussion. Actually, I'm really grateful to David Whitehouse and Jenny Stanning and the team at OE UK, who were really, those around the table making the point that they want to continue to be partners in the relationship. And that doesn't mean we agree with everything, because we very clearly won't. But what they want from us is, they want an open door in terms of being able to discuss and engage their concerns. And I said, look, every single organisation, business should be able to feel that they're getting appropriate access to government. So we agree on that. And we actually agree on the end destination. We agree that there has to be a just transition to net zero. The disagreement may come in terms of the pace or how quickly, and so on. So that was just one meeting that's a demonstration of the positive relationship. But it will take time, and as I say, there will be bumps in the road, I don't doubt. But no, I'm very keen to make sure that we continue to reset that relationship and move forward with it.
You're very clear about the need for that reset right at the start of your tenure. Is that an acknowledgement that things weren't going well under your predecessor? And was she anti-business? Maybe not on purpose, but...
Nicola definitely wasn't anti-business. And you can... And I get why I asked the question about my predecessor, but look, ultimately I've been in government for 11 and a half years. I've got to also say that I've got a role and responsibility, as have other government ministers and cabinet secretaries that have been in government for a period of years. We've all got to acknowledge that somewhere along the way, business felt that they weren't being listened to adequately, and my job as First Minister to make sure that is reset, and that's what business was calling for. That's why we have the New Deal for Business group. We're again making progress. I'm not going to doubt for a minute that there's not going to be bumps in the road. There absolutely will be. But as long as we can keep that engagement going, moving forward, I think is really going to be incredibly important. And I think there's a lot we can point to in terms of how we're working with business, doing things differently with business, and we'll continue along that journey.
I think, if I could remark on that, I think there has been a step change in terms of the volume of engagement with business. We've certainly seen it in the northeast of Scotland, and it's something we're really grateful for. I think my challenge is, you're engaging with business. Are you listening with business? I think the income tax going into the last budget, as an example, you had 8 business groups speaking with one voice on the issue, and you decided to go against them. So what can you do to reassure business that you are actually listening to their concerns?
I think that's a really fair challenge. I think it's a really fair challenge. But what I would say is listening and engaging doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything. We're not. So let's just, from the beginning, say there's going to be differences in terms of your what you want government to bring forward in terms of policy, and what I will do in terms of policy. But a couple of things. First of all, we shouldn't just be engaging. I'm pleased to hear that you feel there's been a step up in terms of engagement and visibility. I also want to make sure that business genuinely feels that they are assisting us in relation to policy development around the economy and so on and so forth. If I take income tax as an example, look, these decisions are never taken lightly. It's not a light government decision to take, or one that you take off the cuff around taxation, particularly when you're going into an election year. We all know 2024 is an election year. But we did so partly because of the constraints that we have over our budget. There's no denying our budget is a fixed, mainly a fixed budget. We've got income tax, and I'll touch upon that in a second. We've got limited borrowing powers. And therefore, if we wanted to do the things that we want to do in relation to uplifts to the NHS, education, justice, fire, police, fire, what we want to do around transport, active travel, all these things require money. And when we have such limitations on our powers, varying income tax, or as we did, introducing a new band, can help us to achieve all of what we want to achieve and make Scotland an attractive place. What we're doing is really asking those who are the 5% highest earners, includes, by the way, people like me who are on a First Minister's salary, to pay that little bit more, but for it, you get a lot more. We get things that others in the rest of the UK don't get. We get free university education in some of the world, the best universities in the world. We don't pay a single penny for our prescriptions. And this is what we do so evidence-based. this is the final point I'd make on this, is that people have been saying to me and the government for years that, look, if the SNP is on a progressive journey of taxation, then you're going to stop people are not going to come to Scotland. The stats just show that manifestly is not true. You know, NRS stats, 2021, we have a net positive inflow migration of 10,000, or almost 10,000. More people are coming to Scotland than leaving Scotland in terms of those statistics. And that, to me, there's got to be a reason for that. And I think that is because there's opportunity up here. I think it's because we offer things like free tuition or no tuition when it comes to university. I think it's things like the baby box, prescription charges, childcare, free personal care, bus travel for under 22s, over 60s, people with disabilities. All these things make a massive difference.
But if those stats were to change, so if there was evidence coming across your desk that it was having an impact, people were leaving the country or choosing not to locate here, would you look again at it?
Look, behaviour impacts will always be considered as part of any income tax decision. You would be a foolish government not to look at what the behavioural impacts might well be in relation to any taxation decision. And the other thing I'd say, and I've said this very openly from the beginning, what the UK government does in relation to taxation is something we've also got to keep an eye on, because if there is ever a point that such a divergence would cause that kind of exodus from Scotland, then we've got to be aware of that. But as I keep saying, I mean, we did the work in advance of introducing this income tax bracket in relation to asking the questions around behavioural impact. And by the way, you're never going to get an assessment that says, if you do this, here's exactly how many people will leave and this is exactly how many people will come. Look, you'll get a kind of analysis of behavioural impact and what that behavioural impact could be, and you've always got to just make sure you're weighing that up.
Just moving on slightly, this summer is due to be a refreshed energy strategy. Will the SNP's presumption against oil and gas remain in this strategy?
So I'd love to give you an exclusive in terms of what will be in the strategy, but you'll forgive me, the appropriate thing, of course, will be to update Parliament in due course in terms of that strategy. But for me, actually, the presumption is the right starting place. The position that we have is the right starting place because everybody, and this includes the individuals I was talking to earlier this afternoon in the oil and gas industry, everybody understands the severity of the climate crisis. There's nobody around that table that I spoke to, the Shells, the BPs, nobody around that table that is denying the climate crisis or the scale of that climate crisis. So we're all absolutely in agreement of the scale and the nature of that climate crisis. So therefore, and we all are also in agreement that when it comes to the burning of fossil fuels, there's a significant impact on that climate crisis and only worsening that climate crisis. So there's no disagreement on these two positions. So therefore, actually having an evidence base for why you're extracting more oil and gas is really important, and saying that this is beneficial because of our energy security, because of workers in terms of our just transition, and we're able to do it within our climate compatibility obligations. I think that's a really sensible place to start. So I'm not in the position in the Scottish Government, and we haven't been in the position of saying, no oil and gas licenses ever again, because the transition has to be managed. This was a very strong message coming from we at UK Today, that it has to be a controlled, managed and just transition. And that's what came out of COP28 as well. And look, we're in agreement with that. So we can kind of argue about what's in the strategy and the wording that's used, and I think it's fine to have that debate and discussion. I think as a government, what I'm very, very keen to do is say, look, for me, the oil and gas industry has been very, very good for Scotland in terms of our economic success, in terms of the jobs it has created, in terms of our GVA. And I see actually the oil and gas industry as being partners in unleashing our renewable potential. They've got deep pockets, they're able to leverage in private investment. But my job to them, and this is not a surprise, is to challenge them to say, well, look, put your money where your mouth is. Let's move this transition as quickly as possible. Let's unleash and unlock that renewable potential. Let's do it together where we can. And let's just get round to it and move at pace. And in fairness to those around the table, they were really up for that challenge.
That draft energy strategy was also published prior to you taking on the role as First Minister. There's been some change politically in the Cabinet since then. Is the current Cabinet aligned behind that presumption against oil and gas at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the government speaks as one voice, and the current policy is as you've articulated it. But as I've already said, for me, to Finlay's point, to me is the right starting place. But what I absolutely accept, and I heard this again today, that investor confidence is really important. I'm always happy to speak to anybody who's looking to invest in Scotland to say, look, Scotland is going to do this through a managed, just transition. Nobody in the Scottish Government is saying that you turn off the taps today, tomorrow, overnight. It's going to be a transition over decades. And I want Scotland to be at the forefront of that. I think if Scotland is the blueprint of how you do that, so you go from being the oil and gas capital of Europe to the net zero capital of Europe, then if we can do that, what a blueprint for the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. No, it's definitely an aspiration, I think, that we all share. Where do you sit on the counter argument about, well, if we're not producing it ourselves, if we import more oil and gas, it could potentially increase our carbon emissions? Offshoring our offshore emissions isn't really helping in the grand scheme of things. Where do you sit in that argument?
No, I think the argument obviously has some validity, but if you take, somewhere like Rosebank as an example, look, the majority of what's been produced from Rosebank will go overseas, and then potentially some of it might well be back imported back to Scotland and the UK. But it's I would argue from a Scottish and UK perspective isn't necessarily going to help us massively in terms of our energy security, and that's why I vocalise my concern about that licence being approved. So I think we've got to really take an evidence-based analysis of each case-by-case basis, each licence on a case-by-case basis. That's why my position isn't that, by the way, there should be no new oil and gas licences ever in the future at all. But we've got to look at three things. We've got to look at our climate obligations first and foremost. We've got to ask the question about workers and just transition, because there is no transition that is just that leaves tens of thousands of workers, particularly in the northeast, in the scrap heap. And then energy security. We've got to ask these questions, and we've got to strengthen the climate compatibility checkpoints, which is a call that we've made for many, many years now.
Mm. And if we're going with an evidence-based, the North Sea Transition Authority says domestically produced gas is up to 4 times cleaner than imported LNG. So would you favour domestically produced gas over importing LNG more broadly?
Look again, where we can reduce our importation because of the carbon implications of that, then of course we should be favourable in terms of that consideration. And that's why I say to you, these decisions should be made on a case-by-case basis. By the way, the decisions are not made by me, as you know, they're made by the UK government. And I think the frustration for me is we've currently got a UK government that doesn't really want to engage in this issue around the just transition in any meaningful way. It's doing it in a kind of political, with a lot of political slogans. There's going to be a change of government in 2024 of that, I don't doubt in the slightest. And my offer to Keir Starmer, Ted Miliband, who drives their energy policy is, look, come and speak to us in advance of a general election. Let's work together so that we can unleash the potential of Scotland's renewable sector, and that's got to be a just transition. Let's do that in a way that gives the investors the confidence they need to invest now in Scotland, and that investment, we'll see the return. We'll see a great economic return for that in the years and the decades to come.
Mm-hmm. Just one follow-up. Obviously, your industrial strategy that you announced last week, there was talk of a £20 million capital fund funded by the oil and gas industry. Does that include revenues from Cambo and Rosebank?
20 billion.
20 billion, sorry.
For 20 million, take us too far. 20 billion. In terms of oil and gas revenues, look, we're not talking about going back on licences that are already being granted. But what an incredible way to use that revenue by making sure that it powers the just transition to net zero. I think that's the appropriate way to use revenue from oil and gas. So inevitably, as I say, we're not going to rip up licences that are already there in existence. But as I say, the best way I think to use those revenues is to help to fund net zero.
And just before we kind of wrap things up here, a quick question on independence. When the results were announced that you were to become First Minister...
There's no such thing as a quick question on independence, but please.
Well, you said, as the 14th leader of this great party, we will deliver independence for Scotland together as a team. Do you honestly feel 10 months on, giving polling figures we're seeing, such as today when Labour are 1 seat off the SNP in Scotland, that you are moving that goal forward?
That is absolutely the intention, of course, of mine, to move that go forward, and the SNP and membership, the membership of the SNP should judge me on being able to move that goal forward. The answer to your question is absolutely, and I'll tell you why. Because you've spent a fair considerable amount of this podcast, understandably so, asking me about the challenges that I faced, and I think we're all in agreement they have been pretty numerous over the last 10 months. Notwithstanding that, support for independence is rock solid. 50%, there or thereabouts, sometimes above 50%, sometimes slightly below 50%. And that to me tells me we've got a rock solid foundation. This general election is a real opportunity. And I only hypothecate on winning. And for me, there's a massive opportunity, and particularly relevant to the northeast of Scotland, for a few things. First and foremost, for those that do want to see the back of the Conservatives, and that is, I think, the vast overwhelming majority of the public after 13 and a half years of utter chaos that they've inflicted, not just in Scotland, but the whole of the UK. Well, the only way to do that in Scotland is to vote for the SNP. We are second place in every single Conservative seat in the country, including those in the northeast. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is, when it comes to the general election, Keir Starmer is going to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. 20, 25 points ahead of the polls. Let's not pretend otherwise. So he doesn't need Scotland to win. That allows those who believe in independence to vote for what they believe in, and others. Even if you don't support independence, if you want Scotland's voice heard at Westminster, well, that is what the SNP does. That's our reason d'etre, is to advance Scotland. And you may not agree with everything the SNP does, but you cannot deny that we constantly talk about Scotland, talk up Scotland, bang the drum for Scotland, and make sure Scotland's voice is heard. So there's a massive opportunity in the general election for people to do that. And for those who believe in independence, it's very simple. If the SNP is winning, if we're advancing, then the cause of independence is winning and advancing.
What would you say to a North Sea oil worker who might be fearful of a Prime Minister Keir Starmer and a First Minister Humza Yousaf collectively running our government?
Look, I won't speak to what you should think about Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, because look, I think there'll be plenty to be worried about in terms of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. What I can say to them is I not only value what they're doing at the moment, I believe they've got massive potential to help us to empower, to power on the just transition to net zero. So look, the oil and gas industry is going to continue to be with Scotland, not just for years, but for decades to come. But also, we know that those skills are so transferable into renewable technologies. And I saw that when I visited Verloom earlier today. In fact, founded by two individuals who were, of course, previously in oil and gas, and now helping us to drive forward Scotland's renewable, and the world's actually renewable potential as well. So I think there's massive opportunity if you're a oil and gas worker in the northeast to know that we value the industry, but we also value it not just for what it's providing currently, but actually you will be a worker for the future of Scotland's net zero ambitions.
Mm-hmm. And on the Just Transition Fund, just finally, it looked like from the budget announcement that funding for it's falling back from 50 million to 12.5 million in the year ahead. Are we putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to the Just Transition?
Well, we are. We absolutely are. Look, there's always going to be a phased approach to the Just Transition, and we can only do, as I've already said, what we can within the budget that we're given by the UK government. And when it comes to capital, for example, we're looking at a 10% cut over the next 5 years. When it comes to resource, our budget has been cut over the years in real terms, and is really difficult, really challenging. So we'll do what we can. In the budget, of course, you would have seen the announcement around 66.9 million, I think it was, in relation to the 500 million that I've announced over the coming period for anchoring supply chain. And the North East in particular will benefit from that. So this is the first down payment on that particular investment. So I'm very confident of our investment in relation to not just the Just Transition, but importantly the supply chain that's required to power that forward.
Would you accept the rollout's been slow so far?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, one of the first announcements I made in that visit to the North East, of course, was to put additional money towards that Just Transition Fund. And I don't know any other country that is putting money towards the Just Transition Fund in the way that we are. Certainly no other country in the UK is committed as we are to that Just Transition.
First Minister, thank you ever so much for joining us. Just some quick fire questions.
Oh, those ones I hate the most.
Quick fire questions before we go. Who is the most difficult politician you've had to debate against?
The one that the most difficult I've had to debate against, I'll tell you, as Minister, the one that you hated seeing in the order paper, as it was the business bulletin, if you were to get a question from, was the late and great Margot MacDonald, because she would really tear you apart if you didn't have the right answer. She was not only incredibly clever, of course, as she was, but she had just the sharpest wit about her. So I remember being a minister, and when I saw Margot MacDonald's name in the paper, going, right, I'm in for it now. So she definitely was the most difficult I think I ever had to deal with in my time.
What's your favourite part of Scotland?
Oh, come on. You can't ask me that. You can't possibly ask me that. I mean, other than, of course, my constituency and Glasgow Pollock. It's hard for me to say. I mean, Scotland genuinely is stunning, and I love it. But no, I can't. I don't think I've got a favourite. I've got a place that's very sentimental to me, then I'll go with that. And that's Loch Fiscally, actually, of all places, up near Pitlochry, because it's near where my wife and I went on our first date. So that's one that is quite sentimental and quite important to me. But yeah, I'm not going to fall for your trap.
Is that Wee Street in Peterhead not a contender, no?
Maiden Street. Yeah. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. So many parts of Scotland mean so much to me, for sure.
What's your favourite food?
Oh man, this is another good question. My absolute favourite food is something called nachari chicken. So achari is quite a spicy curry that's made with kind of pickled mango and so on. I'm probably not selling it, but it's really one of my favourites. And then the one I like to cook the most, which people seem to enjoy, that I make and I quite like, is a lamb shawarma. So I tend to make that from a shoulder of lamb with all the spices and slow cooked. I make my own yogurts and sauces and seasonings for it as well. So there's two.
If you were to make a lamb shawarma for 3 opposition politicians, who would you make it for?
Why are you doing this to me? I don't know why you're doing this to me. 3 opposition politicians, and they can be in any parliament and so on.
In any parliament in the United Kingdom.
Any parliament in the United Kingdom. You got me. So, taking that, I really do have a lot of time for Mark Drakeford. So I like him. So I'd like to invite him. I really, and I've already had lunch with her, but I really like Michelle O'Neill as well. So as an opposition politician. And then in the Scottish Parliament, if I was to choose an opposition member that I would invite around for that lamb shawarma, it would probably be Faisal Chaudhry, because he has some great stories, some that definitely cannot be told on camera or on this podcast, and he's a heck of a good laugh, as well as, by the way, believe it or not, a very good cook, so I'm sure he'd be willing to bring a dish.
Who is your favourite Scottish football linesman?
There's this one guy called Douglas Ross, who I think gets every call right now. I don't have a favourite linesman or referee. Is there any football fan who has a favourite referee or a favourite linesman?
We quite like John Underhill in the North East, but he's retired.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Which opposition politician do you admire the most?
Do you know, look, I genuinely admire a lot of my colleagues in politics, regardless of which political party they're in, because we all give up and sacrifice a lot of time with our family and friends, and high degree of public scrutiny in terms of our role. Which one do I admire the most? So I think in terms of opposition, probably have the most admiration in the Scottish Parliament for somebody like Pam Duncan Clancy. I think she made history. I think she's somebody that I am inspired by in terms of what she's achieved. I think she is unapologetically her. And I think she absolutely stands up, gives a voice to those people in Scotland with a disability and have lived with a disability their whole lives in a way that many of us have never been able to do. So I really admire her quite a lot. I disagree with her on many occasions, but admire her quite a lot.
And just lastly, if you could turn the clock back and do something different in your first 300 or so days as First Minister, what would that be?
There you go, 300 odd days it's been. I don't know if there is actually anything that I would do necessarily hugely differently. because, and by the way, I'm not a big one for regret. Don't get me wrong. I think if you've done something that you should have done differently, you should be upfront about that. You should apologise for this hurt. I think if I could go back slightly earlier than 300 days, I think the election contest that we took part in wasn't always, I think, the best in terms of party morale. I think it's fair to say, and I think all of us who were involved in that contest, although we, certainly Kate and I, continue to have a friendship. Perhaps there was times where we could have approached that contest slightly differently. I think she would probably say the same, and I think I would slightly say the same. So maybe it's a bit of a cheat in terms of your answer. It was slightly before those 300 days, but the election contest, I think we probably could have handled slightly better.
First Minister, thank you again for joining us on Chamber Talk. Thank you also to the Policy Director at Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, Ryan Crighton. I've been your host, Finlay Jack, and please do join me next time on Chamber Talk, where we'll be joined by one of the men looking to take the First Minister's job in the coming years, Anas Sarwar. We'll see you then.